Okay, well, thanks so much everyone for joining us. I'm really sorry there's been a delay with starting this presentation. That security alert, by the way, is just for a video, but if we can't watch it, then that's fine. My name is Dr. Sarah Louise Smith, and I'm a lecturer in film at the University of Essex in the UK. And I'm going to be talking today about public speaking. So I've got a bit of a presentation for you, and then there'll be some time at the end for questions. So if you do have any questions, you can either start putting them in the chat, or you might want to wait until the end of the presentation, and then we can go over some of those questions then. So we could just move the PowerPoint slide forward. Okay, great. So the first thing I've got is a poll. So if you're able to, if you have a computer nearby, if you have a mobile phone, you can put in the web address pollev.com/Sarah Smith 637. You can see that website right at the top of the slide here. If you put that web address into a web browser, either on your laptop or on your phone, it will prompt you to ask a question: do you enjoy public speaking? And you can vote either yes, a bit, or not really. So if you want to, if you could try out that poll now, I'd be really interested to know if anyone actually enjoys public speaking or if anyone doesn't. So if you open a web browser and put in pollev.com/SARAH/SMYTH637, and it should bring up that poll. I'm actually not sure if the poll is going to work, so I think we might skip forward 2 slides. So if we can skip forward again, yeah, that's it. So I was interested in capturing people's responses, but I think that's not going to work. So having some tech issues, but that doesn't matter. I think, well, what I've already seen on the chat is people saying that they are anxious about public speaking. I've seen a few people have already commented to say that they get very nervous and anxious when they're speaking. And I wanted to capture that in the poll, but that doesn't matter. I think most people would say that they are afraid of public speaking. Is not everyone's favourite thing to do. So just for the people in the chat, we're not going to be doing the poll going forward because I don't think that's going to work. But the point of this was to see whether people are afraid of public speaking, because this is quite a sort of well-known response to public speaking, that people really don't enjoy public speaking. People don't enjoy it to the extent that there's actually a word that defines this hatred of public speaking, and it's glossophobia. This means the fear of public speaking. So people actually have such a fear of public speaking to the extent that it's actually a phobia. And it's suggested about 25% of people have a fear of public speaking. So if you are one of those people, you are not alone. A lot of people do not enjoy it at all. So if we could just move forward the slide. So lots of people are afraid of public speaking. Why are they afraid of public speaking? There are several reasons why people tend to be nervous, anxious, or afraid of public speaking. We can just move forward. There are so many people who have an anxiety around it, especially an anxiety around failing. And I've noticed in the chat, some people have already said that they have an anxiety around public speaking. And I know for some people, anxiety is a really debilitating disorder. It's a really serious medical illness. And, you know, if that's the case with you, then, you know, there'll need to be some more work to be done to help you with your anxiety. But if we're talking about a general kind of nervousness or worry around public speaking, This is a kind of normal response to public speaking and something that you can absolutely overcome. And I think people particularly feel anxious around public speaking because it's such a public way of being seen to, quote unquote, fail, to do something wrong and to embarrass themselves. We move forward one. People often have an anxiety over the bodily response to public speaking. It's very apparent when you're nervous, you're shaking, your voice is wobbling. So it's difficult to hide your nerves in your public speaking, and this makes people very anxious. If we can move forward. There's a fear over the performance of public speaking. People worry that they're not good enough, that they won't perform well enough, that they'll be boring or they won't speak clearly enough. This is another thing that's wrapped up in this anxiety. Move forward one more. You often don't know who you're speaking to. I don't know who's listening to my talk right now. I know that you're students, but I don't know much more about it than that. So there's an unknown audience element quite a lot of the time when you're public speaking. Move forward one more. There's a fear about being judged or evaluated. And sometimes, obviously, you are being evaluated. If you're doing this for school or university, you're being graded on this. But sometimes it's just a more general sense of being judged for not being a good speaker. And that's a real fear for people as well. And move forward one. And there's a fear over status difference. If you're someone who is a student and you're doing this for a teacher, or if you're an employee doing this for an employer, there's a fear over giving a presentation to someone who has more sort of power or prestige than you. And move forward one more. And lastly, there's a kind of lack of experience. If you haven't done this very often, people worry about it, they get nervous about it, and this doesn't help. So these are some of the reasons why people are afraid of public speaking, but these are all things that can be overcome, and they can be overcome relatively easily with just some preparation and practice. And this is what I want to talk about today. So we can move forward the slide. Okay, so what makes a good public speaker? Someone who's generally well known to be a good public speaker is former US President Barack Obama. And I was going to play a clip as part of his, that was a sort of speech that he gave in 2004. I wonder whether the clip will work. I suspect it won't. Are you able to click on that image there? There's a video embedded, or is that not working? That's fine if it doesn't work. Let's just move forward. Okay, so if you're interested, if you haven't seen Barack Obama speak, I would advise just going onto YouTube or any kind of video platform and having a look at some of his speeches, because he has a very sort of particular style and interesting way of talking. But even if you haven't seen him speak, there are certain things that he does that are considered sort of excellent traits of a public speaker. Now, I want to suggest there are 3 things that Obama does that makes him a particularly good public speaker. Firstly, it's his choice of language. So obviously, you might not agree with what he's saying, and to a certain extent, sort of the argument that he's making in his speech doesn't necessarily matter in what makes him a good speaker. What makes him a good speaker is how he actually structures his language, the kind of details that he adds to his speeches to add interest and sort of texture to what he's trying to say. A classic thing that Obama does in his speeches is he adds little interesting details to his talks, whether this is an interesting anecdote at the beginning of his speeches, or giving a concrete example to something that he's saying to illustrate a point. So, for example, he might talk about, needing better employment in the US, and he'll illustrate this by saying, the steel worker in Detroit needs to be able to take up an extra shift. So he uses these very concrete, specific examples to kind of illustrate what he's saying, and to give the audience a concrete example so that they can imagine this in his mind. And also in his language, a classic technique that Obama uses is that he uses repetition. So he'll often sort of repeat a phrase as a kind of hook to get people interested. So he'll say something like, there's more to do to improve education. There's more to do to improve healthcare. There's more to do to improve on levels of poverty. So that kind of repetition of his language is another thing that he does to get people interested and hooked on what he's saying. A second thing that's really important in terms of Obama speaking is his voice. He has an excellent projection of his voice, so he projects his voice outwards. He's not just speaking like this so no one can hear. He's speaking out towards the audience so they can hear his voice clearly. He uses pauses for effects to add sort of heighten what he's saying and to help with his pace. So he can pace his speech well throughout his talk. And speaking of pace, sometimes he speeds up what he's saying and sometimes he slows down. So the way that he uses his voice is really important. And finally, his body language is important as well. So you can see in this image in the PowerPoint that he's using his hands to gesture outwards. And also he has a kind of open body language. So he's often turned towards the audience so that they feel sort of welcome and drawn into his speech. So these are kind of three key things that Obama does that makes him a good public speaker: language, voice, and body language. And we can use all of these things that Obama does to help us become a better public speaker as well. So I want to suggest some of those ways that we can do that. So we move forward one slide. Okay, so what makes a good public speaker? How can you become a good public speaker? I want to suggest two things. We move a slide forward. Can we just move the slide forward? Okay, the two things I suggest are preparation and performance. So the way that you prepare your speech and the way that you perform your speech. Okay, move forward. So preparation. How should you prepare your speech? So when you obviously start out, you have to think about what are you going to say. So when you know what you actually want to say, you need to know how you're going to say it. How are you going to actually deliver this? How are you going to structure this? There are certain things that you can do to more effectively give this speech. We move forward the slide. Think about your opening. I would suggest either beginning with a kind of anecdote or some kind of audience participation. So open with something interesting to say that will grab the audience's attention. In Obama's speech in 2004, that I was going to show you, so you can look at this on YouTube. This is from the Democratic Convention in 2004. Obama started with an anecdote about his ancestry and heritage. So it was a really good hook for the theme of his talk. It was really interesting because it was, his personal history, and it made him seem sort of, it humanized him. It made him seem interesting. You learned a bit more about him. And then it also linked to the wider themes of his talk, such as diversity in America. Or you could also begin with audience participation, as I tried to do at the beginning of this talk with a poll. Obviously, this works slightly better in person because then you can just get people to raise their hands. But think about having something interesting to open with. If we could move forward one. Remember to structure your talk well, in the same way that you would write an essay or written piece of work. Think about having an introduction, a middle section, and a conclusion. Don't forget the conclusion. It's important to wrap up well. So think about how you're presenting that information and structuring it easily so the audience understand, here's the beginning, here's the middle part, and here's the end. Move forward one. In your kind of rhetoric, so in the kind of language that you're using, consider repeating certain phrases. So use repetition. As I said, Obama does this when he says, you know, we have more to do in terms of education, we have more to do in terms of healthcare, we have more to do in terms of poverty. So that creates that kind of link that the audience can hold on to and follow through, especially if you do this 3 times. This is known as the power of 3. So you kind of repeat something in 3 different ways. This is a really good way of kind of having that kind of repetition in a really effective way. We move forward one. And also consider what we call signposting. This is literally letting the audience know where you're going and what you're doing. So you can say something as clearly as, in this next section, I will talk about this. So it's just literally a way of signposting what's happening next. And again, that's a really good way of the audience understanding what's going on and being able to follow your presentation really easily. Move forward one. Okay, so in your preparation, should you write a script? Should you not write a script? And I see we've got a question here in the chat. Do we have to memorize the lines? So this might be part of it as well. Some people say you can write a script, so you can literally write out every single sentence that you're going to say. I personally think that this is a bit boring, and it leads to a bit of a boring speech because you tend to just read it off the screen. It doesn't make your body language very engaging. It makes it boring to listen to. You often fall into the same vocal rhythms if you're reading off a script. So I would suggest, if possible, not doing that. If we can move forward one. I would suggest thinking about cue cards. So I've got an example of a cue card on the screen here. So these are small cardboard cards where you write down keywords or phrases that act as prompts so that you can remember what you are going to say. So you don't write full sentences, you just write keywords so you remember what your point was going to be. Or maybe you write down, you know, an important statistic that you need to remember or something like that. But it's just supposed to be a prompt. I think these are a really good way of sort of writing out your speech when you're doing public speaking. I think it makes for a much more interesting and engaging talk. And if you are going to use cue cards, remember to make them easy to read. So leave a line between each point like they've done in this cue card. And also I'd advise putting a number in the corner of the card as well, so you remember what number each is, just in case you drop them all and then you need to remember what order they go in. So number all your cue cards. If we can move forward one. Or you could do what I do, and I use a tablet or an iPad. So I just write down notes in this way, and this is what I read off. And I find this a really helpful tool because then I don't need to write anything out or print it off. So I would really recommend using an iPad or tablet if you have one to hand. Move forward one. And also consider visual aids. Do you know where you'll be speaking, how you'll be speaking? Do they have any technologies to enable PowerPoint or Prezi or any other kind of visual aid app? Could you use photographs? Could you use handouts? Could you use a poster? Think about the kind of room that you'll be in, the audience that you'll have, the people who will be listening and watching your talk, and consider whether this is appropriate and in what form. Okay, can we move forward one? Okay, as part of your preparation, I really suggest practicing your speech. Move forward one. We just move, thank you. You must practice your speech. So this question about do we memorize the lines, you don't need to memorize every single line, but if you practice your speech over and over and over again, you will become more familiar with what you're going to say, And then you'll remember it more easily when you come to speak it. So you don't need to memorize the lines in the same way an actor has to memorize lines for a play, but you remember the point you're trying to make and some of the key things that you need to say in it. I cannot recommend practicing your speech enough. This is so important to building your confidence and giving you the reassurance that when you give your speech, you will do it well. If you have anxiety around, worrying that you're going to say the wrong thing, or you're going to be really boring, or your words will come out all scrambled and you won't speak clearly, practicing will help this. Practice on your own a few times, practice with a friend, get them to listen and get them to critique you. Practicing is also important, not just because it will help you remember what you want to say, it's also really helpful so that you know what pace you need to talk at, whether you need to slow down, whether you need to speed up, whether you are running over too long. This is why it's important to practice. If we can move forward one. Check for pace, as I said. I always practice if I'm giving an important speech because I've learned that I speak too quickly. So if I practice several times, then I'll realize I need to slow down. And people have listened to me speak before when I've been practicing and they've told me this. So I really recommend practicing, and then you'll realize you need to slow down your talk. Move forward one. And again, this helps you check your timings. So you'll realize if you're running over too much, if you're spending too much time on one point, practice, practice, practice. It's the most important thing you need to do. Move forward one. Okay, so you've done all your preparation, you've done loads of practicing. What now? There are a few things that I suggest that you could do right before your speech, which will help. Move forward one. The first thing is warming up. I particularly recommend warming up your voice, even if it's just speaking to yourself for a little bit, just so your voice doesn't come out all hoarse and kind of croaky. So just making sure that your voice is warmed up. I also help, just speaking a bit beforehand helps. If I'm feeling nervous, it just helps with confidence. It just kind of gets you into that kind of mode. So I'd recommend doing that. Move forward again. Take deep breaths. This is so important. Try and calm yourself down before you go on. You, of course, be nervous if you're ever giving a speech, if you're ever having to speak. So try and take a few deep breaths and really try and calm, your heart rate, calm any kind of nerves that you're feeling to try and sort of sound as confident as possible. Move forward one. This is something that I've heard people do. It's not something that I've ever done before, but you might want to try it out if you're having to, say, get up on stage and give a talk there. Is consider doing what's called the power pose. So you can see this woman is doing it in this picture. She's modeling herself after Wonder Woman. And what you do is you stand with your feet quite wide apart, so wider than hip width apart, and you put your hands on your hips and you stand almost like a kind of superhero. So you can do this backstage just before you go on. And the idea of doing this is that it builds confidence. So you're kind of standing strong and tall like a superhero, and this kind of gives yourself confidence. So you might want to consider doing that as well. And secondly, and lastly, have water ready. So you will need to drink water if you're giving a talk. Make sure you have it prepared. You will get a dry mouth throughout. So make sure you have some water prepared. Okay, next slide. So as I said with Obama, what makes a great speaker is not just what they say, it's how they say it. It's about their voice. There are certain things that you can do with your voice that will really, really help you give a good speech. Move forward one. The first thing to do is to speak slowly. Speak more slowly than you think you need to speak. You will think that you sound ridiculous, but you don't. Trust me, speak more slowly. People will appreciate it who are listening in the audience because they might struggle to keep up, especially, I'm speaking in English. Maybe for some people, English is a second language, and I'm sure that they will appreciate if I speak slowly. So take your time, don't rush, and speak slowly. Next point. Another thing people don't do often when they're speaking is pause. You can pause throughout your talk, and people probably won't notice that you're even taking much of a pause, but it's really important, both in terms of sort of adding effect to what you're saying, adding a bit of drama, or just taking a moment to stop, recollect your thoughts and think. So don't be afraid to take a short pause at some point to think about what you're going to say next. Thirdly, don't forget to project your voice. So don't speak down into the ground, speak out. Speak slightly more loudly than you would in conversation, and enunciate your words as well. So speak words clearly. Don't be mumbling. Make sure people understand those words that you're saying. And that's another reason why it's important to speak slowly, because your enunciation will be more clear. And lastly, drink water. You probably noticed that I've been drinking water throughout my talk because your mouth gets very dry. And that's why, you can take a pause and drink water, and then that's fine. Next slide. Okay, and also think about your body language and how you actually perform this speech through your body as much as through your voice. Next slide. I suggest picking spots in the room to look at. So don't just look at your cards down like this. Don't just look up at the ceiling. Don't just look at the floor. Pick certain spots around the room so you can keep looking around the audience. If we were face-to-face, my examples might work better. But do pick some spots to look around the room. And don't be afraid to make eye contact with people in the audience as well. Next slide. I'd suggest planting your feet on the floor hip width apart, so you don't need to stand kind of cross-legged, looking awkward, but don't be afraid to move around. This is something that a lot of students, when they're giving a talk, they're very afraid to move. Don't be afraid to move. Move around in front of the floor, be dynamic with your body. You don't have to just stand really close to the floor and not move at all. And this will help you feel more confident and loose as well. So don't be afraid of that. And finally, last slide. You can use hand gestures as well for emphasis. Don't be afraid to articulate something, especially if it's something important through your hands. So this makes your speech more dynamic if you're using your body as well. Okay, and final slide. So what if something goes wrong? Next slide. Okay, first of all, don't panic. I'm giving a speech to you today and something went wrong for me. The technology didn't work. It doesn't matter. We got it working in the end. I've delivered this speech to you. It's okay. Things go wrong. This happens. So you can always go forward and think, even if something goes wrong for you, well, something went wrong for Sarah on the day that she was giving a public speech about public speaking. So don't worry. Things will go wrong. Don't panic. Next slide. If anything happens when you're giving a talk or you're not sure what to say or you've forgotten what you're going to say, just take a quick pause. Like that. Take a quick pause, reset, rethink, and just carry on. But don't be afraid to take that small moment of pause. Take a bit of water or something. Next slide. Just do whatever you need to do to finish the speech, to say what you wanted to say, and get through the talk. Don't worry about it. And finally, people will remember that you kept calm. So if you keep your cool, everyone's always on your side if something goes wrong when you're giving a public talk, because everyone knows how awful it is. So don't worry about it. People will empathise and they'll remember if you've kept calm. Okay, but that was everything I wanted to say. So I don't know if we have a huge amount of time for questions, but if we do have any burning questions, if people want to put them in the chat and I'll try and answer them. I hope I answered some of those questions about how to stop feeling so anxious when you're speaking. I hope I gave you some tips, but do drop any questions you have in the chat now.